More than stereotactic body radiation therapy, SBRT grew out of two converging ideas in the 1990s. First, from neurosurgical and radiosurgery, we learned that a very high, precisely targeted dose could ablate the lesion safely if normal tissue was spared. Second, physicists and radiation oncologists in Sweden, Karolinska, built rigid body frames and refined CT-based planning so we could bring that neurosurgical precision to tumors outside the brain. As image guidance and linear accelerators improved, cone beam CT, respiratory motion control, non-coplanar beams, later VMAT and robotic platforms, SBRT matured from a brief concept to a routine curative tool, especially for medically inoperable early-stage lung cancer. By the late 2000s, prospective trials showed local control rates rivaling surgery for small peripherally lung tumors, and the technique spread to liver, spine, adrenal, prostate, and oligometastatic disease. How is SBRT different from conventional radiation therapy? Think surgical ablation with photons versus gradual dose accumulation. How is SBRT different from conventional radiation therapy? Think surgical ablation with photons versus gradual dose accumulation.
Most things change gradually until a threshold is crossed. Heat water and nothing dramatic happens. And then at 100 degrees Celsius it boils. Cool water and nothing dramatic happens. And then at 0 it freezes. A steady quantitative change suddenly becomes a qualitatively different state. Philosopher Georg Hegel called these sudden leaps, points where a slow slide turns into a step change. You see it everywhere outside of medicine. Heat iron past the Curie temperature, and it abruptly loses ferromagnetism. Cool certain materials below a critical temperature, and electrical resistance drops to nearly 0, superconductivity. In epidemics, if R0 is below 1, outbreaks fade, crosswind and spread takes off. In networks, add just a few more links, and a giant connected component appears almost instantly. In biochemistry, cooperative binding means a small increase in the ligand can flip an enzyme or receptor from off to on. These are all Hegel's leaps. Phase changes that hide inside gradual trends until a boundary is crossed. Radiation therapy follows the same logic. The key variables are dose per fraction and BED, biologically effective dose. BED is a way of comparing different fractionation schedules using the formula BED equals N times D multiplied by 1 plus D over alpha beta. For many tumors, we use an alpha beta of 10, so we call it BED-10. What matters for today's story is not just the total dose, but how large each fraction is, because dose per fraction determines whether we cross biological turning points in the tumor. Here's the simple math to make that concrete. 60 gray in 30 fractions, 2 gray each, has a BED 10 of 72. Now compare that to 30 gray in a single fraction. BED 10 is 120. Same total dose, completely different biology. The single high dose crosses a turning point that 2 gray fractions never reach. You see the same thing with common ablative schedules. 50 gray in 5 fractions, 10 per fraction, lands at BED-10 equals 100. 48 gray in 4 fractions, 12 per fraction, lands around 105.6. Once you get into that territory, the system behaves differently. That's the heart of SBRT, Stereotactic Body Radiation Therapy. SBRT uses a few very high-dose fractions, often achieving BED-10 at or above 100, to push the tumor past critical thresholds. It's not just more of the same damage. The high dose per fraction flips additional mechanisms on. At conventional doses, the classic effect is DNA double-strand breaks. Important but incremental. At SBRT level per fraction doses, roughly 10 to 15 gray or higher in many contexts, the type of injury broadens. First, microvascular collapse. Tumor capillaries are lined by endothelial cells that are surprisingly sensitive to big single hits. When enough of those cells undergo apoptosis after a high fraction, small vessels prune away, the microcirculation collapses, and entire regions of tumor are starved of oxygen and nutrients. One damaged vessel doesn't just harm one cancer cell, it can deprive thousands downstream. Second, programmed cell death. High single fractions don't just slow cells down, they push them toward apoptosis and mitotic catastrophe. Cells try to divide after catastrophic damage and simply can't complete the process. Third, immune activation. When tumor cells die abruptly, they release danger signals, DAMPS, and cytokines. Those signals recruit and activate dendritic cells and T cells. In other words, a high dose can turn a cold tumor bed into a more immunogenic one, adding an immune layer of killing on top of direct radiation effects. All three, microvascular injury, programmed cell death, and immune signaling, are examples of quantity becoming quality. Raise the dose per fraction above a threshold and new biology turns on. There's a flip side. If you stay below the relevant thresholds, you risk partial killing. Some clones die, others survive, and over time you select for radio-resistant populations. The oncology version of what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. SBRT aims to leap over that selection pressure by exceeding key tumor thresholds decisively within tight geometric limits. That brings us to the dual threshold reality of clinical practice. For the tumor, we want to exceed thresholds. High BED, high dose per fraction, enough to trigger microvascular collapse and immunogenic death. For normal tissues, the spinal cord, the proximal bronchial tree, esophagus, chest wall, heart substructures, we must stay below their thresholds. The art of SBRT is crossing the right thresholds while avoiding the wrong ones. How do we make that possible? Precision and restraint. We use high-quality imaging to localize the target. We account for breathing motion and daily setup with motion management and image guidance. We shape those with steep gradients so it falls off quickly outside the target. And we respect conservative constraints for organs at risk, especially in central lesions where a millimeter matters. SBRT isn't just big doses. It's big doses delivered with sub-millimeter discipline, or we don't do it. Let's tie back to the numbers. Picture two early-stage lung cancer plans. Plan A is 6 degree in 30 fractions. BED-10, 72. Plan B is 50 degree in 5 fractions. BED-10, 100. Same organ, similar total dose, but Plan B is far more likely to push the biology past the tipping points we just discussed, provided the tumor is small, well-defined, and the nearby normal structures can be spared safely. For some peripheral tumors, regimens such as 54 gray in 3 fractions, 18 per fraction, BED-10 about 150 are used when anatomy permits. The takeaway isn't that higher is always better. It's that the right per fraction dose can change the kind of response you get. If you prefer analogies, think back to the non-medical examples. Boiling water at 100 degrees is not hot water but more. It's steam, new behavior. Magnetization past the Curie point doesn't fade politely. It drops. The network doesn't kind of connect. A giant component emerges. Cooperative enzymes aren't a dimmer switch. They snap on. SBRT leverages the same pattern. Cross the relevant thresholds and the tumor environment flips. From fed to starved, from damaged to doomed, from invisible to immunogenic. There's also a humility lesson here. Thresholds are real, but they're not uniform. Different tumors, different locations, and different normal tissues have different limits. Patient selection, staging, motion, comorbidities, all of these matter. The philosophy is simple, the execution must be individualized. So here's the practical lesson to take with you. In any complex system, know the threshold. Thanks for watching. This video is educational and not personal medical advice. Talk with your own care team about your situation. If this helped you see the logic behind SBRT, consider subscribing and share this with someone who appreciates clear science explained simply.